Hi guys. Before we proceed to this video, we've got something very important to share with you. Neoliberalism, Inequality and Authoritarianism by Professor John V. Kofis is available for purchase. You can order it directly from the publisher Little French eBooks or through Amazon.
The victory of the November 2025 election for the mayor's office in New York City was one that is of very important significance, both symbolic, especially symbolic, but also substantive. The young man who was elected, Zoran Mamdani, had against him the entirety of the mainstream media, with very few exceptions of some independent organizations. The mainstream Democratic Party on whose ticket he ran, and obviously the Trump administration and the Republican Party, but not just that. This young man who ran on a democratic socialist agenda, and we will deconstruct what this means in the longer video where I analyze the domestic and global reaction and significance to Mamdani's victory. And I invite you to take a look at that particular analytical video. But for now, for this teaser video, I would like to point out that Wall Street was definitely against Mamdani because he ran first and foremost against what Senator Bernie Sanders from Vermont, as well as others, have continued to label as the American oligarchy and its stranglehold on the political system through campaign contributions and determining public policy to benefit the richest, he says 1%, let's just say 5% of the American people. In my view, Mamdani's victory was more symbolic, but we have to wait and see what happens in terms of public policy that he will adopt. When a person who goes against the institutional establishment, the hegemonic culture, the billionaires and millionaires that throw money to make sure he's defeated, and even after he wins, even after the majority of New Yorkers vote for him, the elites, political, cultural, not all of them within the cultural realm, but especially the financial elites, when they decide that even if he won, it means nothing to them, because they will continue to undermine, to defame, to make sure that he doesn't succeed even before he takes office in January of 2026. Now, is the Mamdani victory that radical in terms of world politics first, and second, even in terms of American history? Is it that radical? There have been mayors, including in New York City, namely LaGuardia, during the Great Depression, who collaborated with FDR, and this young man has a platform, a series of policy proposals, not that different from the mayor of the Great Depression, who embraced the New Deal, who embraced Keynesian economics. Of course, he had the collaboration of the White House, namely Franklin Roosevelt. LaGuardia and Franklin Roosevelt got along, and Franklin Roosevelt helped a great deal. Mamdani has Trump, who has stated publicly that he will do everything to undermine the mayor-elect of New York. And there have been calls by Republicans to deprive him of his citizenship. Now, here is someone, this is how bad things are in New York, which is the financial capital, not just of the United States, but of the world, and has been since the interwar period. When World War I ended, the financial capital of the world became New York City. It used to be London before that. After World War I, it was New York City. And New York City elects someone who goes against the financial elites because they have brought the city to its knees. It's a city of 8.5 million people, and 2.6 million are below poverty line. 26% of the children in New York below poverty line. More than half cannot afford to buy a home, an apartment, a condo, whatever in New York, a single home or any kind of a house in New York. Rent in New York City, it is no secret, this is borne by statistics that the city itself produces, regardless of who is in office, is among the highest in the land, comparable to cities like Honolulu, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., Boston, among the highest in the world, in fact. New York City is also a city with a GDP of 1.6 trillion. And if you count the New York metro area, it's 2.6 trillion. And that is as much as the GDP of France. And yet, quarter of the population, quarter of the children in the city, 2.6 million of New Yorkers below poverty, and more than 50% unable to afford housing and making ends meet in terms of high rents as well as the high cost of living. Many, as the mayor-elect pointed out in many of his speeches, many of these people are forced to live as far away as Pennsylvania or New Jersey because of the high cost. Now, how desperate do New Yorkers have to be to go to a young man who was born in Africa of Indian parents, is a Muslim, and self-proclaimed democratic socialist? How desperate do they have to be? They are indeed desperate, and it's not when the Pew Research Center ran statistics on this, among other statistical analysis. What we'll see, and I'll mention a Gallup poll as well, what we see is that they are well aware that the elites in the United States, namely the political class representing Wall Street, have been responsible for the chronic, not just temporary, not just because of the 2008 deep recession, which was like a depression if it were not for the Keynesian social safety net, but really a very deep recession. And this led to continued downward social mobility. However, it didn't start in 2008. It started back during the Reagan period, and it's ongoing. It's continuing. And despite the promises of prosperity by neoliberal mayors, one after another, downward mobility in New York, like across the United States, according to statistical analysis, not just rhetoric, according to statistics, downward social mobility continues. So the middle class, not just the working class. That's the interesting thing when you look at statistics, by the way, of who elected Mamdani. Mamdani got a lot of support from the New York middle class, fearful that they are being pushed down by the richest 20% to the level of the working class. Because the richest 20% own the vast majority of the wealth, leaving the bottom 50% to own a mere 8%. So half of the population of New York, 4.5 million people, roughly 4.5 million people, have to make do with 8% of the income collectively. Okay, in a city with 1.6 trillion GDP. This is why Mamdani was elected. The reaction has been one of panic, not because they are afraid he's going to succeed, because they meaning both the Democratic establishment as well as the GOP as well as the Trump administration, because they will do everything to undermine his administration. And because the fact is, Mamdani will be operating from a cocoon, from an enclave, a small enclave, in a larger political economy that works within the neoliberal political economy model. The reforms he has proposed are not radical. If Mamdani were in any Scandinavian country, any of them, Norway, Sweden, doesn't matter, Denmark, even some Northwest European countries like Germany and Holland, he would not be considered outside of the establishment, his ideas, his platform, because in the Scandinavian countries and some Northwest European countries, the fact is what he's proposing, the social safety net to be strengthened, affordability of housing, affordability of childcare, affordability of public transportation, all of this in Northwest Europe is considered within the mainstream. In fact, there have been published articles already noting that the Scandinavians don't see why is this guy so radical to the American conservatives. In fact, they see him as very much within the mainstream, because if he were in Copenhagen, if he were in Oslo, Norway, okay, he would be regarded much more mainstream than he is in the United States, where he worked within the system, by the way. This is not a rebel, this is a reformist, not a revolutionary. He didn't come outside the system, within the Democratic Party, won fair and square. And yet, the mainstream GOP, mainstream establishment Democrats do not recognize the legitimacy of a system they are supposed to be defending according to the US Constitution, namely the electoral system. They want to deport him back to Africa, where he was born, or anywhere but the United States, because they don't recognize the electoral process. The voters that endorsed him to become their mayor were wrong. This symbolic victory threatens the status quo. It threatens the political economy. It is indicative that the elites in the United States fear democracy and have disdain for democracy. They do not support the democratic process. Otherwise, they would simply accept the result, the will of the people who cast their vote. They cast their vote. That's the system. Okay. Instead, already there are plans on how to make sure this person is undermined. And who is it really undermined? This is just one human being, just one person. It is the population of New York, that bottom 50%. That's whom they're undermining. They're not undermining Mamdani. He can go back to India or Uganda. It doesn't matter where he goes back. That's not the issue here. The issue is that the government of Washington, D.C. under Trump, if it tries to undermine Mamdani, and it will, by the way, it will be undermining the people of New York City. It will be undermining the voters of New York City, the viability of New York City. Now, there have been some voices that have, from namely Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan, the chief executive officer, a couple of others who said, okay, we'll try to see if we can work with them on city bonds, issuance of city bonds, and so forth, and see what we can do. However, obviously, when you work with these people, they demand that their agenda, first and foremost, is placed at the top of the list. And their agenda is not to create a viable social safety net like Mamdani wants. I want to point out that in a Gallup poll just in September 2025, before Mamdani ran for office, 2/3 of registered Democratic voters stated that they see fit to support socialist ideas. With regard to this self-identity of democratic socialism, and there are democratic socialists in the United States, registered democratic socialists, what does it really mean? What does democratic socialist mean? Other than an FDR New Deal Democrat. That's all it means. It means Keynesian political economy, New Deal economics. It means a rebuke, a denunciation of neoliberalism, which sends income from the bottom 2/3 of the population to the richest at the top, exactly as Senator Bernie Sanders has stated. That's all it means. It does not mean expropriation of JP Morgan, the JP Morgan banking empire, or Goldman Sachs. It doesn't mean any of that, or General Motors. That's nonsense. It just means allowing people to take the bus or the train and paying a little bit less, lowering the rent, implementing some kind of rent control so they can afford a teacher who's paid peanuts given what the high cost of living is in New York City. So the teacher can afford to live in the city where she works rather than go over to Pennsylvania or New Jersey and travel back and forth, commute. That's all it means. So the nonsense rhetoric, the vacuous rhetoric about a jihadist socialist, by the way, 1/3 of the Jewish voters, because they've made a lot about Mamdani being anti-Semitic. He is anti-Zionist. He is within the same mindset as many, including the United Nations, including most governments in the world, international human rights organizations, including Israeli ones, including Israeli scholars of the Holocaust. He agrees that genocide is wrong, apartheid is wrong. So he's against ethnic cleansing is wrong. Okay, he's against the apartheid Zionist state. He's against genocide. He is not anti-Semite. 1/3 of the Jewish New York voters agree with him. A number of high-profile Jewish New Yorkers voted for him, supported him publicly, and he has some within his inner circle, by the way. So to try to dismiss him is merely a propaganda tactic to destroy the symbolism for which he stands. I ask you to look at the longer video and to please leave a comment, and by all means, join this channel. Thank you very much.